Welcome, everybody, to the Verts podcast. I am your host, as always, Sonny Weaver. On the show today, we got a special guest. We've had him on before, but he's been gracious enough to come back again and talk to us a little bit longer, and that's Dickson, head of creative director for Madden 17 is I believe, the official title, correct?
Well, yeah, I'm actually creative director of gameplay, but since there's no other creative directors around, they just generally call me creative director around here. But yeah, my primary focus is gameplay.
Okay, well that's good to know. If they bring another creative director, we'll have to, I guess, specify that.
Yeah.
So, and that may cause other issues, but we'll leave that be. So let's kind of pick up where we left off last time. One of the highlights of what you talked about last time was you had gotten really good feedback from the beta testing, and so you made a comment that said you were waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I remember I tweeted at you a couple days later that the shoe had dropped. And what I mean by that was there were some hiccups there in EA Access. And when I got to thinking about when that happened, as a developer of a game, your customer base's first look at the product, and it was kind of hindered by stuff outside of your own control. So what was kind of going through your head during that process? I know you were actually, I think, on the air. You guys were doing your live stream when they released that on Access, and so you were kind of battling two fronts there. You were doing your live stream, but also dealing with some people getting access there, 4 hours before what we were initially thinking we would get it.
Yeah. So the EA Access thing was kind of what I would call a minor hiccup, in that, some people had some problems, and there was some stuff going on with our first party partners that caused some issues. There was like 3 or 4 things that happened in a very short amount of time, but most of those issues were fixed within a couple days. And I actually got to work with a couple guys, specifically individually, to help get them unblocked. But that was very minor compared to some of the launch issues we had, when it went live. Like, for example, the run pastel, which for me was a much bigger problem than the EA Access issues we had.
Yeah, so that actually is a great segue there. So the run pass thing was interesting, and you mentioned that. Run pass was something, obviously, that the beta test didn't quite get. And when we talked about the beta test, it's obviously a small group. But one of the things in the beta test from people I have heard from was there wasn't a ton of peer-to-peer gaming during that beta test. After you guys get through the testing, get through launch, have you guys looked at the process and said, okay, guys, here's some things we need to improve on for next year's test that maybe have caused us to miss on some things?
Oh, no question. I think chief among them was just the scale of the beta was too small to get us the kind of coverage we need. But don't forget, this is a first time that Madden's done a beta like this, so there's a lot of fear and a lot of risk, and people get nervous about how much access they have. And it's interesting because I just saw a game from Ubisoft called For Honor launch their beta, and they said no NDA. Post whatever you want. Post videos, stream it. If there's something wrong with the game, we want to see it. And I was very interested in that approach because obviously for us, there was a lot of fear and insulation and, keep this restricted to people we trust and we know. And I think, that kind of hurt us a little bit. But because it's our first year doing a closed beta, I understand the reasons why, business reasons why they wanted the scale to be small. Obviously, you want to build on that in successive years and grow it. And as you have a successful process, you grow it, you expand it, and hopefully you have success again. We did get a lot of feedback. We fixed hundreds and hundreds of things before launch, but a few things slipped through as they always will. And I think if the beta had been larger, if we had been able to maybe expand it to a couple thousand people versus 100, we probably would have caught a lot more stuff.
Yeah, and so as you as a developer, you get things to launch, and obviously you have your own QA department, guys testing things, and you've got the beta testers, and then it gets out to launch, and then within X amount of hours of game being out there, somebody tweets at you and says, hey, this is here. What's that like when, I mean, is it like a oh crap moment, or how does that feel when somebody points something like that out so quickly after a launch?
It's just going to happen. The thing with those things is like when you have a game that's now at scale, and by scale I mean like millions of people are now playing it. You're gonna know what's wrong with your game pretty quickly. Like within the first few days or first couple weeks, pretty much everything that's wrong with your game, someone's gonna send you a video or an email or a tweet, and even you'll get Deadspin or some other site linking a video to a bug to try to clickbait. And then inevitably I'll get an email from my boss, and he'll be like, "What's going on with this?" So yeah, I mean, it sucks. It sucks because you want to launch clean. You want to launch a perfect game. Me personally, I'll enter 500 plus bugs in a given alpha cycle personally, which I don't know too many creative directors who do that. But it's a big deal when you ship with a few bugs, especially when those bugs are enough to make people not want to play the game. And so yeah, I mean, it's embarrassing. It's tough. And then the worst part of it is some of these issues you have fixed like within an hour. Within an hour of learning about it, QA has reproduced it, an engineer has found what the problem is, fixed the problem, and then you have to sit and wait because you can't just send that code fix out. You have to sit and wait for the next patch. And a lot of times what happens is the more issues get reported, the more stuff goes into that patch. And the more stuff goes into that patch or title update, the more testing you need on it to make sure you didn't break something else with what you changed. And so you're in this sort of never-ending loop of, let's just get this one more fix in. And we just heard about this one new thing and we have a fix for it. Let's get it in. And every time you do that, it extends the date out a little bit by which that patch is available, which is why one of the reasons why we forced that title update out early, the one with the run past tell, because there was an option to kind of wait until we had more fixes and put that in with the big patch. But for us, that and a few other things were so severe that we had to get them out early. So it's tough. You obviously want a clean launch. You don't want to ship with any bugs. I think we all know how hard it is, especially for games like us and 2K and Call of Duty, who have to flip it and turn an annual release around every year. It's very tough because your desire to go big and get more stuff in the game and give the community everything they want sometimes needs to be tempered by, are we going to have enough time to stitch this all back together and get it cleaned up? And sometimes you come up a little short.
Yeah, and we'll get into that yearly release thing because there's some interesting stuff around that. But, the holdup for you guys getting out those fixes, like you mentioned, you'd love to just pump those out as you fix them, as you do it. But it's not just a holdup at you guys. There's restrictions on getting those out from Microsoft and so on too, right? I mean, that's not, that hold isn't just you guys.
No, we call that certification. So anytime you're going to do a title update, you essentially have to go back to the certification process where you submit your build. For us, we submit it to EA has their own certification group. So EA Cert would have to run it through all these tests. And when I say all these tests, I mean like go into every mode, test every option. They basically have these smoke tests that are like, a sanity check across all modes, all settings, all options. And when you think about the size of a game, any sports game that has like, it's really wide in terms of mode and then really deep how you can go into each mode, those smoke tests are huge. And it's just the process we have to go through where they have to go back through and check everything to make sure that we didn't break anything else when we put all these fixes in the patch. And then when that's done, it has to go to first party, Sony or Microsoft, and then they have their own cert teams who run the same exact process all over again. And all this is done to protect users from downloading the update and all of a sudden having a broken game on their hands.
And so I think some people assume that that's to protect you guys, but like you said, that's really protecting the customer from ending up with something that further damages their own experience. So that's something I wanted to point out there because I'm not sure everybody really understood that process and how that all worked. So let's move past kind of some of the stumbling blocks there. Overall, critics, and I'll use that term loosely, but anybody that has a website to review games, I mean, the reviews came back positive, and I think it was a good step forward. And I think overall, the recognition there of the advances you guys have made was noted. As a developer of a game that you know has such a storied history, when you come out with a positive review like that, what's that process like? I mean, as you see them come in, I see you retweeting them. Obviously, you're reading them all. Is that, you know, confirming some of your thoughts? Is that, you know, was it better than you expected? What was that process like?
It was flat to what I expected. I had predicted an 83 heading into launch with my bosses. You know, it was different. It's different now than it was 5 years ago. It used to be that Metacritic was a big part of how we judged ourselves. And I think that's kind of gone away to a large degree because reviewers don't make up what we'd consider core for the most part. And what's becoming clear to us and becoming clear to other kind of service-based games like Destiny or League of Legends is that your core is what's really important. And no matter how good your reviews are, if your core sentiment isn't high, you're going to be in trouble. And so we have a different way of looking at things now. Obviously, we still look at our Metacritic, and it's still important, but it's not a leading indicator for us of success. A leading indicator for us of success is now things like session days. How many times or days in a row did the person turn on Madden 17 before they stopped? Things like, Net Promoter Score, which is a survey we send out that asks people, like, how much did you enjoy this game? How likely are you to recommend it to a friend? They derive a point value out of that tells us how positive our community is about the game. We also have this tool they use called Tracks, which basically follows every time somebody mentions Madden 17 on social media or in a forum, they will gauge whether or not that comment is positive or negative. And then we'll get this picture of, you know, over hundreds of thousands of comments made about Madden 17, this percentage positive, this percentage neutral, this percentage negative. Those have now become the leading indicators of how we judge success. Obviously, sales is a big part of it as well. But for us, the biggest thing right now is how is our core community sentiment about the game?
That actually leads into something that over the last week has kind of been brought up. You guys appear to be engaged in what I would call crowdsourced development, maybe. There have been, you know, surveys and invites to game testing and so on. And so that interests me because I think more developers should head into the path of building games and developing games for what the customer wants rather than what they think the customer should want. And so this new approach, at least new from what I'm aware of, obviously you've had the Game Changer program for a while, but this kind of more broad approach seems like a change in direction for you guys. Is it a change in direction in the way you guys are developing?
I'm not sure if I would call it a change. I would say that as time has gone on, the company has started to recognize the value of direct interaction with the community. And the more value they feel they're deriving from that, the more they're going to drive it, support it, fund it, etc. This whole thing started when Andrew Wilson became the CEO of EA, and he defined this tagline called "Players First in Everything We Do." And so, as a company, as a team, as an individual, contributing member of EA, each one of us kind of has to take that mantra of what does it mean to me to be players first in everything that I do? And so you'll probably see a lot of that behavior mirrored in me and how I interact with people on social media, how I jump in Twitch chats, because I'm trying to interface with players directly so that I can understand where their minds are at and what they're thinking. I could sit here in my office and look at data and look at statistics, but it's not until I go in the social media sphere and I go into chat rooms that I'm getting a direct narrative from the players that are telling me how they feel about the game. And that, to me, as a game developer, is of tremendous value. I don't think it's new for us. I just think it's working, and so the more it's working, and the more we communicate to the organization that it's working for us, and we need to go bigger with it, the more we expand the program.
So, do you ever find yourself getting pulled in a million different directions by your user base? And what I mean by that, I'm not sure if you're a Simpsons fan, but there was an episode of The Simpsons where they were kind of just tests showing itchy and scratchy episodes, and there's a guy standing at the front asking them questions, and what he comes up with is, so you want like a realistic, down-to-earth, space-based, basically a million different things, and the people say yes, that's what I want, and it's impossible to give them everything they want. You've got such a diverse community. Do you ever find yourself struggling to give everybody what they want? I know we talked last time about maybe catering more towards the people who want to play real football, but there's a large part of your fan base that, or user base, I should say, that wants things that may not necessarily be, simulation football.
Yes, extremely complicated. And the main three axes that I have to account for are simulation, competitive, and then what we'll call casual. Now, so most of the last 3 years, I have been primarily focused on simulation, making sure that the franchise guys who want a realistic, authentic football experience, which was my X for this whole product, is authentic simulation football. And that's been, pretty much guiding a lot of our decisions over the last 3 years. Now, when the competitive gaming division was born and we started the Madden Challenge, everything kind of changed underneath me, because now I couldn't no longer dismiss the way the top 2% of Madden players were playing the game. All of a sudden, all those exploits and cheats and glitches they use now became must-fix issues because we were going live on national television with it. And so everything kind of changed, and then I had to start thinking about that group as well. And that's when things started getting really complicated, because the simulation guys want different things from the competitive guys, and the competitive guys want the game to play a certain way that the simulation guys do not want. So what I'm doing now is actually looking for consensus where I see things lining up between the feedback. Like, for example, today's tuning update included some fixes for making the run defense more effective. Now, a lot of franchise guys will tell you there's nothing wrong with the run game and they're going to ruin it and whatever. But the honest answer is I have statistical data that's telling me that it's too high. And that's not just in competitive play. I can see specifically how many yards per carry and how many yards per game people are running for on average in franchise, and see that it's too high. So I'm going to put out a tuning change to try to bring that back down within the statistical averages that we're looking for, our target ranges. Now, what you're going to get now is a bunch of guys in CFM coming back and saying, oh, you nerfed the run and you ruined the running game. But what I have is a global picture of how things are playing out. And although they might have a run game where they only run for 40 yards and they'll blame the tuning update and they'll blame me for ruining their mode, the truth is I see things globally. And globally, the run game was overpowered by, almost based on my calculations, like I'd say we were around 5.5 or 5.8 yards a carry across the board, and that's too high. Like, it's way higher than the NFL average, which is down around, I think, 4.8. So there was a very specific reason validated by the results that told me we needed to make that change. Now, the other axis on this whole thing about balancing the community's requests is the casuals. And what a lot of people in the community don't understand is how much incredible pressure guys like me and Clint are to try to appeal to casuals, to build modes for casuals, to build features for casuals. Because for whatever reason, there's people in this org who has this business sense that we need to attract new people in to grow the Madden audience. Because they believe that we're kind of just rehashing the same core users over and over. So there's all this emphasis to build features and build mechanics that appeal to the masses, which you can imagine is in direct conflict with what our core users want. That is almost impossible to manage for me and has been a very difficult challenge. One of the reasons why I built Skills Trainer, for example, when I first got here, was to ensure that the casuals and people who needed a learning tool had something. but I was building something that wasn't going to nerf the game for cores. It was just going to be a special place for people to go to learn. But a lot of the times when we're managing and building features, we get a lot of top-down pressure to make them more casual. And I know that that is almost always in direct conflict with what our core wants. That is one of the most difficult parts of my job.
Yeah, and that it goes back to to player first, right? Which player? And that's a good question, is which player do you want me to put first? Do you want me to, and so I think it's a thankless job you guys are put into, because like you said, you got to balance it for everybody. And I know it's appreciated that you do take certain communities in mind for different things. When the game released, I know kicking was a huge hot button point, and I ran out quickly to DM you and say, whatever you do, don't just change it because people are demanding you to change it. It appears at this point that kicking, the vitriol towards kicking has kind of calmed down as people have actually taken the time to learn how to kick. And I think the fundamental issue of people for years have been able to kick 60-yarders with their eyes shut in Madden. The fact they had to relearn that caused a lot of anger. Something as simple as kicking an extra point was now difficult. How do you determine when you're going to hold pat on something and when you're going to tune and kind of give in and say, hey, maybe that is a little tough?
It's all pattern matching for me. That scene in The Matrix where the guy's sitting there staring at code and he's like, I don't see code, I see this woman and that one. That's kind of me on Twitter. I'm like, I don't even see kind of who's talking. All I see is they're talking about this issue, or they're talking about that issue. And my brain just kind of does a running checklist of how many ticks, how many times has this been mentioned, how viral is this becoming, how many people are complaining about this specific thing. And that's kind of, how I end up tracking and knowing when I have to take action on something. The kick meter was interesting because we knew going in that it was going to be polarizing. Obviously, whenever you make something harder or more realistic that was a gimme, you're going to piss people off. And in fact, the GM of our studio, who's my boss's boss's boss, came to me and he said, now, Rex, we are keeping an option for the old analog kick meter, right? And I said, no. And he said, well, you have to. You have to keep that in as an option if people don't like it. And I said, well, that defeats the whole purpose of us building a new feature, because we want to make it harder. If I have the old option in there, people are going to just kick 60-yarders easily again. And I basically talked him out of, forcing us to keep an option to support the old meter, because my opinion is, like, when certain ideas like this, you have to commit. Like, you can't go in half-assed and be not sure about the direction you're going and say, like, well, I think we should try a new kick meter, but I'm not sure. I'm a little bit worried about pissing people off. No, like, screw that. We're doing the new kick meter. We have to get it right. And then, what was nice is on the first week of the NFL season, there were 3 blocked extra points and I think 6 missed extra points on the first day alone. So it was nice to kind of see the validation that, kicking in the NFL is not a gimme, and finally the game reflects that.
Yeah, it's become an inside joke in our league now that every time someone misses a kick, we run to Twitter to see who's going to say EA kick meter or Madden kick meter there, because it is now almost part of the culture that when somebody misses a kick in the NFL, somebody's going to tweet out that they haven't practiced with the new kick meter yet.
Yep.
So the stats, I'm guessing, have bared out over a couple weeks. Have we started to get to a more realistic? I'm sure early on, as people didn't do the training and didn't understand how to kick, it was pretty ugly. But have they come back down to a point where it seems like we're trending in the right direction now?
Yes. The only exception to that, and I'm looking at the stats right now, nothing stands out to me as being out of range right now. But there are some stuff that's, the per game stuff actually looks pretty good, but some of the per attempt stuff is slightly too low or too high for my liking. But when it comes to field goal blocks, punt blocks, and missed extra points, everything looks like relatively within range of what you'd see in the NFL right now. Now there is some stuff, some outliers in the stats, but all of that stuff is in the title update that's coming, the big one with like 200 plus fixes in it. That is going to be, a fairly big change for the game and changes up the meta quite a bit.
Yeah, because I noticed you point out specific conditions like rain or snow and things like that. So you're getting all those stats based on different variables and game conditions when you guys go into making a tuning update like this.
Yeah, because anytime we build a new feature, I make them build telemetry hooks, which means I want to be able to tell what's happening. So anytime we build something like a special teams thing, I say I need to know, number of attempts, number of misses, number of blocks, so I can see all of it. And I can actually see it during test when QA is working on the game. I can see what's happening and see statistics from test. And then once we go live into production, everything goes at scale. But what my expectation is that the stats will stay in line with what our expectations is.
So you mentioned today that in the next update we're going to get an update on the fatigue issue. Can you kind of spell out what exactly the issue is? Because I think I've heard different explanations of what actually the issue is, and I think it's almost creating an undercurrent of complaint there that may not even be a real complaint.
Yeah, no, it's a legit thing. There's actually two issues that I'm aware of. I think the biggest one is lack of auto subs and MUT, which is a fairly straightforward bug fix to make sure that your tired players get subbed out for your backup, so you don't have like tired guys in the game. But I think the one you're talking about would be the one that people talk about more often in franchise, which is the away team fatigue issue. And what's happening there, what we believe is happening, what we believe we have fixed now, is that essentially it had to do with a cold weather team playing at a warm weather stadium. There was an extra modifier for fatigue impact there that had kind of been poorly coded. And so what would happen is you get these situations where you get a team like Pittsburgh playing in Miami, and their whole team would be exhausted the whole time because whatever modifier they put in to say cold weather team gets more fatigued in hot weather climates had been coded wrong and was applying too big of an impact. So once we found it, it was a fairly easy fix. But this is the reason why people are like, I don't understand what's happening. Why are my whole team fatigued? It wasn't like this in the last game. The assumption now is because you were playing at a warm weather stadium.
That's interesting. So you guys do go as far as to, warm weather team, cold weather team. I mean, that actually does affect the game.
Here's the problem, though. It's a piece of code that was written, God knows how long ago. And we make, I talk about this all the time about splash damage. We make one slight tuning thing to the fatigue system and forget about this piece of code somebody wrote, like, God knows how many years ago about, like, how this modifier should exist in hot weather games, wasn't accounted for in the tuning update. So therefore, that's how he broke fatigue in away games when teams were playing in warm weather states. This is what I talk about when I say, like, working on Madden is like doing brain surgery on someone who needs a tumor removed, because you have a very strong chance of touching the wrong thing or touching a nerve that's connected to something else and breaking 3 other things. This is a very big reason why these patches are so big and take so long to get out, is because there's millions of interconnected systems which could impact each other from one small change. This bug is just one example of that.
So I kind of want to shift here to something else that's on my mind. Another thing that's come up often is Nano Detection System. It was something you announced kind of live, spur of the moment on the EA stream heading into the release, and it's not had a huge amount of press. So people still report this as a bug that guys are stopping before, they get a clean break at a quarterback and they're going to hit them and they stop. So they say that's a bug. Obviously, you guys put that in for a reason. Maybe take us through the logic behind that and kind of what kind of response you guys are seeing from it.
So, the Nano Detection System was largely when we went through the beta. Well, first of all, at the Madden Challenge last year, I had a bunch of meetings afterwards where a bunch of executives were asking me questions about, why was the game allowing that? And so, my boss came to me and said, we really need to take a look at this. And I said, we spend a lot of time fixing these issues every year, and every year they find new ones, and I feel like we're spinning our wheels. My fear is that if we shipped 8.17 in its current state at that time, we would have ended up spending 3 engineers for 6 months or more fixing all the nanos and blitzes that you guys found. That to me was a shitty value proposition. I said, there's no way I'm spending the cost of a back-of-box feature to chase nanos all year, knowing they're just going to find new ones when we fix whatever we find. We need a comprehensive solution that's going to not force us to have to fix each individual issue as they come up. And therefore, the Nano Detection System was born. Now, this happened after the beta. This was based on all the blitzes people found in the beta that we realized like we were never going to be able to fix this individually, each blitz. So we had to implement a system that served as a catch-all. Now, the problem with introducing a big feature that late is it goes in kind of raw, meaning we don't have months of testing on it. We don't know all the things that go wrong with it. And as a result of that, some things slipped in that we didn't want, like nano detection triggering on users playing the CPU wasn't supposed to happen. Nano detection triggering on run plays, that wasn't supposed to happen. This is the nature of us putting it in late because we didn't have enough time to tune it and polish it and get it right. Good news is now that it's been out in the wild for a while and we've seen videos and gotten feedback on it, I think that with the tuning, the title update, you're going to see a much less aggressive nano detection system that still does its job for people who are, doing 30 update pre-play adjustments to get a guy in, but it shouldn't impact your average user, your CFM user, your offline type of user. But that's basically the story around the nano detection system.
So when you go to implement something like that, is that an opportunity? Because I know when you sell, you have to allocate resources like you just laid out there. 3 developers, X amount of hours, and there's a cost associated with that. Does that provide an opportunity to say, hey, this is a stopgap, but really, and as unsexy as this sounds, we need to invest a ton of time in maybe blocking schemes or things like that? Because obviously, there's some things there that probably could be improved to pick up on some of those as far as AI logic on how to handle certain things. But is that an opportunity for you to look at your bosses and say, hey, we're going to do something really unsexy. We're going to spend a ton of time doing line play.
Yeah, the problem is unsexy to them means unmarketable. Like, you're going to put all this investment in and we can't put it on the back of the box. And a lot of the legacy cleanup stuff that I do is just like that. I'll talk about like a major investment we have to do to get some animation pop out of the game. And it will sound like I'm pitching them mopping up a spill on a floor. Like, they're like, why are you pitching me something that you need to fix or clean? Like, that's not something I can ever go out and sell. So it's tough. What I have to do usually is pitch a few features that are sellable back of box, and then on the back end, like kind of out of sight and out of mind, I have a bunch of resources who are just cleaning up, whatever legacy issue needs to be cleaned up. So it is a tough sell, especially after we've spent 2 years and multiple resources trying to get blocking to where it is now. And then on top of that, you want to come in and say, oh yeah, we're going to need to invest another 2 years and 8 resources to figure out all this other stuff. It becomes a bad value proposition from their perspective. You also need to understand that this whole system of doing pre-play adjustments to create a nano and break the offensive line targeting system is something that really only happens at very high competitive levels of Madden. I'd be generous to say top 10%. So if you consider that, as a dev team, if I'm devoting 20% of my strength to a feature, or not even a feature, but a fix that only affects the top 10% of people who play Madden, it's an even tougher value sell, which is why, you kind of have to look for, in some cases like this, a faster, more straightforward solution that solves the problem without breaking your back in terms of the spend.
So you mentioned the Madden challenge, and so this is a good kind of segue for that. So the nano detection system, I'm guessing, is going to get triggered relentlessly through these things and why they're watching. And so is it palatable to somebody watching on TV to see a invisible wall stop a blitzer coming at a quarterback? I mean, that to me seems like that's going to be the red flag your executives talk to you next year and say, hey, my kid was watching that, and all of a sudden the guy just stopped. What happened?
Yeah, it definitely could be. My hope was that once these guys realize that they couldn't make it work, that they'll stop doing the setups. And so you won't see guys flowing through because they know that that's pointless, right? He's going to stop, so why do it? That was my thinking going in. I think, if we had had more time, I could have probably done a better job of picking an animation that wasn't that egregious. But again, part of our thing is just like we want to be heavy-handed and saying, like, guys, stop doing it. Like, it's not cool. But at the same time, we owe the gamers a more polished version and a more polished implementation of the feature that doesn't run the risk of happening in places where it shouldn't be happening. So it just needs a little bit more polish, and I think it'll be in a good spot. And as you said earlier, it hasn't really been that polarizing. I think people accept it and they understand the why. It's been a good move for us, I think, overall.
So something you mentioned earlier, talking about that year-to-year turnover for your game and what you can and can't fit in. With continuous development, you guys release a date or a game on a date. Do you guys view it as that's the release date? I mean, you roll out new features and you roll out kind of draft champions and different things and modes and whatnot. Do the lines get blurred? I mean, you've got what's the release date, but you also have, I'm sure, things that are features that are going to keep coming throughout the year. So are we moving towards this is Madden and you're buying Madden, not Madden 18, not Madden? I mean, you're buying Madden and you just keep renewing it each year, almost a subscription-based game.
Yeah, we talk about stuff like that. I don't know that it would ever go that model. It really wouldn't be my role to try to figure out what that would look like. But I will say that this concept of treating the game like a packaged goods $60 release that comes out once a year and then you move on to the next one is dead. It's just done. This team doesn't think like that anymore. We have a very aggressive continuous release strategy. We know, we kind of understand that it's important to keep people playing Madden all year long. We can't just have everyone just stop playing right after the Super Bowl. It doesn't make sense. For any of these sort of, games like Destiny or League of Legends or World of Tanks or whatever it is, what gamers are doing are basically committing to that culture. They're saying, like, I want to be involved in this community. This game is where I want to spend my time, put my time in. They become core users like year-round, and that's what everybody's targeting now is retention. Like, because that whole idea of buy a game, play $60, play it for 2 weeks, shelve it, move on to the next one is not kind of what everybody's trying to do. They're trying to keep people playing the game as long as possible. Because we're moving to this thing where it's like, are you a Call of Duty guy? Are you a Madden guy? Are you a 2K guy? Because that's predominantly the game you play throughout the year. That's your mainstay, your main piece. And I think a lot of people are starting to gaming like this, and you have to support those people by pushing out new content year round.
Yeah, that's interesting you point that out because I play in NBL, and so we're CFM, we play August to August. And for a lot of us, there's guys that own the Xbox for nothing other than to play Madden.
Yep.
They may have a PS4 and play the show on that, and basically people are buying systems for one game or two games, and then they're devoting all their gaming time to that. So it's an interesting shift in culture, and that's funny you point that out. Now you mentioned a time frame there of stopping playing after the Super Bowl. Now, if you look at the competitive series, and I was looking at your guys' dates of kind of how you set that up. That's no surprise of how you set that up. So you're trying to drag out that interest in the game. Kind of when real football stops, this is when the competitive starts.
Yes, sir. So
how big is competitive gaming going to be in the future for Madden and the franchise itself?
That's a great question. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know what happens when you put $1 million prize on the line, whether that changes anything. I don't know, if corporate sponsors and managers start getting involved, kind of where the ceiling is. As a gameplay expert, as the guy who's responsible for how the game plays, one of the most interesting arguments or challenges that we have, and it's not just us, it's 2K, it's any sports game who wants to get into esports. Esports are traditionally user skill based, meaning all the outcomes are based on the user's skill. If you start throwing ratings into that and dice roll formulas and outcome formulas like sports games have, In other words, it's not all about your skill. It's also about the player you're using and what his ratings are. Um, it creates a very interesting proposition of, can a sports title ever be an esport? Because it's not all user skill based. You're going to have randomness. You're going to have dice rolls. I was faced with this like a few years ago. Cam Newton was down here and they had a tournament, and a bunch of community guys were here, and they were basically playing for a grand prize, which was season tickets to your favorite NFL team for a year. And this guy was clearly the best player in the tournament, but he gets a fourth down late that he needs to convert, and he throws a pass to a receiver who's open, and he rolls a drop. The guy's catch rating just like it was a 72 or something, and he had a bad roll, and he dropped it, lost the game, lost the tournament, lost the tickets to his season, had absolutely nothing to do with his skill. He made the exact right read, and the game just decided, like, that receiver has 70 catch, so he's going to drop it. Now, you have to ask yourself as a creative director at that point, is that good or bad for esports? And if it's bad for esports, what does that mean to the core of what Madden is in terms of ratings and formulas and dice roll outcomes that coexist with user skill? As a gameplay creative director, I spend a lot of time thinking about that problem and how to solve it, and if it can even be solved. I think that maybe figuring that out is the linchpin that could take current console sports titles and turn them into an esports phenomenon. If that doesn't take place or we don't figure that out, I think it's going to be tough, because ultimately, if a game is decided on a dice roll, I question whether or not it can ever be as big as a League of Legends or other games like it.
Not to dive too deep into a philosophical argument about sport itself, but sports in general, the best team doesn't always win, and that is a tough thing to swallow. I'm a Bengals fan, and I can tell you that playoff game last year, the way that game ended, that's tough. I mean, that's tough as a fan to watch that and say, we had that game locked up and crazy stuff. You couldn't write a story that detailed the crazy things that happened in the last 2 minutes of that game, and we lost that game. Now, I understand a position from you guys as you want to set everybody on a level playing field and let the chips fall where they might. But if we're really talking about competition, there's randomness to things and real competition that, maybe that's the sim gamer in me that says, that's life, that's sports, and the best person doesn't always win. But that, I can see where that would be a very tough sell to a gaming competitor.
Especially if there's $1 million on the line in a championship game, let's say $1 million on the line, tie ball game is on the line. Do you really want that to come down to a random dice roll? It's really what it comes down to, because if the user does everything correctly and uses his skill, finds an open receiver, makes the right read, throws the ball, do you really want to risk the chance that he's going to randomly roll an inaccurate pass there? And basically take $1 million out of his wallet over something he had zero control over. These are big questions. And if you don't want to do that, then how do you separate a TJ Yates from a Peyton Manning? These are huge questions for me to answer. And, the fact that we started going down this esports avenue is kind of what brings these things up. And I've been spending almost 1.5 years now thinking about it. I still don't have the right answer, but I'm going to keep pushing until we get there.
Right. Well, good luck to you on that. I think Draft Champions may be a good format for that, because they get to at least pick their random dice roll based players. So you line them up and they go, and that's your fault for picking a guy that you shouldn't have. But
Yep.
To each their own on that. But the competitive aspect will be interesting, and so that's kind of the philosophical stuff I want to talk to you about. Now to some of the general game questions that I get from people all the time. That let's try to get some answers, because you're the man for that. 2 or 3 of them real quick here. First question for you, and this one bugs the crap out of me, and I've talked to Clint about it, and I'm not sure I've gotten the right answer yet, so I'm going to keep bugging until I figure that out. For years, the number 1 wide receiver on your depth chart lined up on the right-hand side on normal formations. I form normal. AJ Green goes to the right. This year, he goes to the left. Not an issue, except the number one cornerback was always off to the right with him. Now the number one cornerback's on the right, A.J. Green's to the left. Now I understand that there are positions in football that dictate where you actually line up. My argument is, if I go to the in-game formation sub and say halfback jumbo backfield or halfback at fullback, A.J. Green goes back to the right. It's only on default that he ends up on the left. Why is that?
The engineers swear to me it was like that last year too. I'm still not sure I believe them. So QA is actually looking into this one right now to make sure that basically comparing it with last year. But I will say that outside of this year, I really want to make best on best a priority for you guys. I know it's come up a lot. I don't think, it should be that difficult for a user to say, I want to have my best corner on their best wide receiver. So I've kind of been championing that as a big priority for us moving forward, is something we need to get to.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And I can guarantee you, with 32 NBL guys, it was not that last year. August to August, I promise you.
I'll check on it for you.
Awesome. Rex, make sure we'll hit you up again later this year as you guys keep putting out updates, because I'm sure we'll be getting fresh content throughout the year. So thanks for your time for coming on tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yep. All right, everybody, that's all the time we have tonight for the Verts podcast. Make sure you check out our other content on the NBL Network. We've got a couple new series out this past series, so make sure you check those out. For all of us here at NBL Network, this has been Sonny Weaver, and I'll see you next time.